Last winter I tried 3 different reserve systems. I learned a lot, not only through my own experience, as well from all the feedback I received from other pilots. This year Thermik Magazin provided me with the new base system from Supair, and the footage, the experience, the conclusions and the questions I'd like to share with you. The first time I tried the harness out, I don't remember much. I pulled on the right handle, and the second situation I found myself in was flying underneath the base glider. The first advantage to me is that the sitting position within the harness doesn't change. With all other harnesses it took some time to adjust to the new sitting position. With that system, straight away one can focus and concentrate on what has to be done next. Landing was pure bliss. I thoroughly enjoyed flying and landing. That is just the safest reserve system within the paragliding scene, in my opinion. Please bear in mind that all my opinions are completely subjective, so please don't forget that. Packing the glider, I was very fortunate that Chris, a friend of mine I did that movie with, is a base jumper and skydiver, so he helped me packing. There would have been too many new things for me coming from the paragliding side. There he jumped, and you can see how little loss of altitude there was and how quickly it opened. Once more in slow motion he pulls, the static line pulls out the container, the glider comes out, the center cell starts to breathe, and how quickly the glider inflates. Another great advantage of that system is that the problem solver itself, the glider that doesn't fly right anymore, is gone by throwing or pulling the right handle. So there's no stress about the glider which is rotating, or in a kind of sudden move that this glider will catch the thrown reserve like on any other system. Flying the base glider as a paraglider is a bit unusual because one has to pull quite hard on the brakes in order to get it move. A little bit more effective is flying over the B-risers. Chris landed somewhere in the woods. There will be another short story about the B-risers in a second. In order to film the opening process of the glider better, we jumped twice out of a tandem, and there we learned a lot. Initially we wanted to test the system out of spirals or provoked situations, but we learned that we leave that to others. Here you can hear the opening sound, a very very loud sound one could hear to the takeoff point. From those angles you can see again how quickly it opens and how little loss of altitude there is. The first time I pulled, everything happened very fast. The second time I pulled and it seemed to me that I was falling forever. My subjective experience of time completely changed. So the third time I tricked myself by starting to count as soon as I pulled, and as soon as I reached 2 I felt the system opening. Chris jumped, the glider opened 90 degrees towards the left. We flew towards the west, and towards the south the glider opened. That is not a big deal, especially for paragliders. But the thing is, there's a short little impact on the body you can feel because there's a sudden change of movement. And this is the reason why we won't do it out of a spiral. There you can see the reason. The container twisted 90 degrees whilst the pilot fell down, and as a result the glider opened into that direction. And you can see the position Chris found himself in for a very short moment of time. There you can see the risers pushing on his neck, and if you imagine that position with an additional g-force of maybe 3 or 4 g's in a spiral, one can imagine that that is slightly uncomfortable. So we don't want to get a stiff neck, or we just don't, we don't want to risk our health. Once more my close to 180 opening, and now we're gonna take a look at extremer versions of our experiment. People twisted themselves, provoked a collapse, waited until the glider started to rotate, and then they pulled the system. As you can see, it works perfectly. If you stop that movie and take a look at the position these pilots find themselves in, you understand why I'm not willing to risk such maneuvers. Obviously, in the worst case scenario, I'm very happy to take on such an impact, because nothing is more extreme than crashing into the ground because the reserve didn't open early enough, or whatever other issues are, or trying to get rid of your glider when you have like a Rogallo glider. So especially for those situations, that's perfect. Once more, how the system gets pulled out by the static line, and to get an idea of how quick that happens once more in real time. Most openings were perfect towards the flying direction. Only twice we had a 90-degree shift, and once a close to 180. Once more, another beautiful, perfect opening of the base glider. There are some base jumpers that avoided a collision with the mountain by bringing the base glider into a backfly after 180, so therefore flying away from the wall and then whilst flying back, turning around. That is a very nice thought, and we tried it out. One needs to pull down the B risers until you feel the base glider flying back, and then suddenly let go of one riser, and whilst flying back you turn around. That is super efficient, fast in comparison to turning by the brakes. Once more, my close to 180, and how after I grab the B risers, start to fly back and then turn around. Obviously these maneuvers are not perfect, that is just to give you an idea of what is possible with that system. And that's another very valid point of mine. To me, that acro harness is not only a acro harness. I do think that every kind of paraglider who wants the maximum of security, I simply think that this would be the logical conclusion. You can maneuver the glider like no other. There is the smallest loss of altitude, and everything just happens so fast. I do think it is a revelation in terms of safety and security. In most cases, the initial paraglider came down slower. In that case it was smaller, so I just had to make sure that I won't fly accidentally into it. There were worries that the free ring system might not open when one is twisted in several times. Apparently there has been cases like that within the skydiving scene. I tried it out, I twisted myself, and then I pulled. Everything worked perfectly. Now we're going to take a look at the harness close up. Here you can see the free ring system, the right handle that needs to be pulled in order to release it. Then the free ring system. If you don't use it very often, one should assemble and disassemble it every other month or so in order to make sure that it really opens. The static line that opens the container, and after the same line pulls out the base glider. In that scene it is twisted once, please ignore that fact, that was a little minor error when filming. The base glider falls out, the center cell starts to breathe and hopefully opens quickly. The A risers and the B risers with the brakes attached, one needs to pull out those brakes in order to speed up the glider. Here you can see a brake, and in the next picture you can see how the brake line is not passed through the metal guide ring. That would have the advantage that in case of a line over, one could clear that situation by throwing out the brakes. Within the last 12 years though, since tailgates are being used, there hasn't been a report on such a thing than a line over, according to Adrenaline Base. And nowadays even more and more base jumpers keep the brake lines going through the metal ring. Now to my personal conclusion. The advantages of that system is the first one. Through pulling on the right handle, the initial problem is gone. One has not to worry about stalling the glider. One has not to worry about the paraglider catching the throwing reserve. One has not to worry about disconnecting the paraglider, flying on a Rogallo. Great advantage. The second one is the extreme fast opening and a little loss of altitude, but one could see that several times within the footage I have taken. The next one is that the sitting position within the harness doesn't change. With all other harnesses I had issues. I found myself in a very squeezed position. Sometimes I couldn't even look up to see what's happening above me. With that harness one can straight away focus on what needs to be done next. That one can move this glider like no other glider, even a Rogallo, that is pretty obvious to me. And there is another reserve on board in case one is lying in the lines or the glider itself. To my disadvantages. It is a very heavy harness. I imagined it way worse than it actually was, since the center of weight within the harness is quite high. The heavy base system is on your back between your shoulder blades, and the second reserve is on the bottom. So the weight is nicely shifted around the body. Taking off ground handling and top landing was by far not as bad as I imagined it. The second one is that there's not even enough space for a helmet within the harness. Obviously a lot of the space is taken by the base system, but therefore you get the maximum of security. My next point is not really a disadvantage, it's a fact. The harness is pretty pricey, but the security I think it provides is priceless. I personally do think that it's a revelation in terms of paragliding security, and therefore I won't be comparing it to any other harness. Why are there no harnesses that combine the three-ring cutaway system with existing reserves like Rogallos, for example? One would still have a lot of the advantages, and at the same time the harness would be cheaper and lighter. I'm very happy to get your feedback. Thank you very much for watching.